In the history of American serial killers, we have seen some truly bizarre examples of how the human brain can go wrong. Most people may know of the case of Ed Gein, a man who tried to get a sex change operation but was denied. Ed Gein wanted to become a woman. Perhaps he wanted to become his domineering, fanatical mother, but when he couldn't get a sex change operation, a significantly harder feat in the 1950s, he decided to make a suit of women's skin that he could wear. He planned to physically transform himself into a female by this method. At first, he only dug up graves to get at the flesh required, but over time, the need grew until he started murdering women to take their skin. Another absolutely insane case is that of Richard Chase, the schizophrenic serial killer who became a living vampire. Like most truly bizarre cases, this one came from California. After doing far too many ego-shattering doses of LSD, his psychotic predisposition started to split his mind into a fractured, nightmarish state. He thought he was having constant heart attacks or that his heart would stop beating randomly. He thought his blood had turned into a powder. He thought that the bones in his skull would move around when he watched them in the mirror. Sometimes, he would put oranges up to the sides of his head to try to absorb vitamin C through osmosis. In the end, he decided he needed blood to keep his heart going. He started by killing animals and drinking their blood. Eventually, he even killed a rabbit and injected its blood into his veins, which caused a severe infection and hospitalization. But his psychotic terrors continued to grow, and he quickly realized that animal blood was not returning his heart to its beating state. He decided he needed human victims, which he found by murdering whole families. He cut open a baby's chest and put its organs in a blender with Coca-Cola, which he then drank. Needless to say, these kinds of insane meltdowns don't only occur in the past. They continue to happen regularly, and no matter how many serial killers we catch, in the end, more always arrive to replace them. My partner, Agent Stone, sat next to me in the black sedan, driving the car at breakneck speeds through the winding roads and rolling hills of Northern California toward the crime scene. An occasional vineyard dotted the landscape in the foggy breeze. I took in all of the beauty and splendor of this ancient land, smelling the sweet spring breeze that blew in through the vents. You ever notice how many serial killers California puts out? Agent Stone asked, turning to regard me with his colorless blue eyes. I nodded grimly. Some states grow potatoes and others grow corn, but California grows serial killers and madness, it seems, I said. Agent Stone barely seemed to hear. Ed Kemper, Lawrence Bittaker, Herbert Mullen, Richard Chase, Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, Joseph DeAngelo, Kenneth Bianchi, and so many others, he said, shaking his head. It's fucking nuts. You know what I think. Does it involve lizard people? I asked with a deadpan expression. He laughed, a brief, harsh laughter that always cut off abruptly. I think it's because California is a leftist shithole. All the college campuses have extreme students and professors. This is where the weathermen and all the bombings started, after all. So they teach these impressionable dumbass kids about killing for the greater good. They call their opponents Hitler and then say they can murder them. So these kids, they grow up listening to their teachers and professors, preaching these radical philosophies and embracing political violence and murder. Some of the smarter kids eventually realize, if we can use violence in these situations, then why not for our own personal causes? Just like the communists and radicals, they start to see themselves as the victim, and those they murder are the perpetrators of, well, whatever they want to accuse them of, Agent Stone said. I blinked rapidly, absorbing the information. You sure have thought a lot about this, I said. I always figured it was just the sex and drugs in California driving people crazy. You know, my brother still lives out here, though I haven't talked to him in a few years. He's a bit whacked out too, I guess, so I take it you're not planning on moving here. Agent Stone just gazed stonily out the front window as he flew down the road. This is going to be Disturbing, Agent Stone said. He pulled the car into a dirt road that wound its way through a public nature preserve. A hunter had found the bodies and called it in. The sedan came to a stop and Agent Stone cut the engine. I noticed the sounds of birds singing all around us while the engine pinged and tinked. This place looked mesmerizing with rugged pine trees and dark brush covering the rolling hills. I opened the door and breathed in the fresh air, seeing a hummingbird fly past my head. 2 other FBI vehicles lay parked nearby, sitting empty and dark. Here, Agent Stone said as he came by my side, holding out a dark vial labeled peppermint extract. He rubbed a couple drops under his nose. This will help with the smell of the dead bodies. They're pungent as hell by now. They've been rotting out here for the last couple weeks. I tipped the vial onto the tip of my finger, repeating the movements. It had an overwhelmingly minty scent. "Let's do this," I said, staying close by his side as we wound our way down a dirt trail and into the woods. I heard the soft murmuring of voices ahead. Through the dark green pines, I saw a fluorescent yellow tent. It stuck out immediately with its garish, day-glow color scheme. Around it, CSI technicians from the FBI gathered evidence. Agent Stone and I always liked to come out and personally look at every crime scene. He claimed it helped him get a sense of the killer's soul, and in a way, I felt I understood what he meant. 4 victims, Agent Stone said. They're all just kids, really. The oldest one is 18. It looks like they were camping here when the killer came out and shot all of them. His faded blue eyes scanned the crime scene, taking everything in with photographic precision. I breathed in the air, noticing it wasn't so pure and sweet in this spot. The smell of rotting bodies and feces hung thick in the air. The more subtle odors of blood and panicked sweat followed it. I nodded, almost seeing it happen in my mind's eye. One of the boys' desiccated corpses still hung halfway out of the open tent door, one hand reaching out in front of him desperately. Another teenager lay dead in the tent, sprawled on top of the sleeping bags. A pool of thick, clotted blood swarming with all sorts of insects surrounded him. The 2 other victims lay in front of the tent, one face down and one face up. The killer had mutilated the last 2 victims, slicing open their chests from neck to groin. He had taken out their intestines and thrown them over the nearby branches like Christmas tinsel. The festering, rotting organs hung like limp snakes covered in maggots. "What are your thoughts?" Agent Stone asked, turning to me. They seemed to connect slowly, puzzle pieces falling randomly into place. The last victim had been a woman in her house, a single mother. The killer had stabbed her repeatedly, slicing her throat from ear to ear. She had a toddler in the next room, but the killer hadn't harmed the child. After dismembering and mutilating her body, he had simply left, coming and going as quietly as a ghost. None of the neighbors had seen anything, and no cameras nearby had caught any footage of him as far as we knew. On the white wall, in her blood, he had written a single word: Jonah. Based on the previous victim and these victims, I think we have a mostly disorganized killer. The last time, he used a knife, and this time, he used a gun and a knife. There's no sign of any sexual sadism, and he doesn't seem to care about the genders of his victims, though all of them were white. I think we are dealing with a white male, late 20s or early 30s. He has a severe psychotic disorder, possibly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and he regularly suffers from command hallucinations. I think, when we catch this guy, if we catch this guy, he will have a totally bizarre motive. Unlike Ted Bundy or Lawrence Bittaker, this guy isn't doing it for purposes of sexual sadism and torture. He's doing it for some reason we can't even possibly begin to comprehend. I'm not even sure if he wants to do it, or if he feels he is forced to kill, but he will kill again, definitely. He will keep killing until he gets caught. Agent Stone and I stayed at the crime scene for about half an hour, watching the technicians work and discussing the case. The technicians told us that the shots had come from a high-caliber rifle at close range. The victims hadn't had a chance. The case got a lot stranger when Agent Stone and I got back to the car. Someone had left a note on the windshield. It fluttered in the light spring breeze as if trying to catch our attention. "What the hell is this?" I asked, moving closer and plucking it out from under the wiper. In spiky, copperplate handwriting, I read the following message: "If you turn this note into evidence, I will kill a family member of yours. If you don't, I will torture a little girl to death." "What the fuck?" I said, handing the note over to Agent Stone. He frowned, his face forming into a stony grimace. "This can't be real, can it?" "Well, shit. We already got our fingerprints on it," he said, sweating heavily. He carefully opened the door and took out an evidence bag, sliding the note inside. "I don't know if this is some kind of sick joke or not, but we shouldn't take any chances. We need to send this note to CSI. Maybe it will have a fingerprint that matches one from the crime scenes, but even if not, having a potential handwriting sample from the killer could help the prosecution. And if it turns out to be bullshit, they can destroy it after the killer gets caught and convicted." We also had a camera in the sedan, just like most police cars. But when we got back to headquarters and reviewed the footage, all we saw was a man dressed in all black, with a dark ski mask, slipping a note under the wiper. He had walked over only a minute after we had started down the trail toward the crime scene, as if he had been waiting there for us to arrive. Thinking of it sent shivers down my spine, and I wondered, at that moment, was I hunting the killer, or was he hunting me? After we got back to our hotel for the night, I tried calling my brother, but the phone number I had for him no longer worked. A robotic female voice came on, saying that the line was no longer in service. For a brief moment, I wondered if he was even still alive. Johnny had always been a heavy drinker, and at some point in his life, that habit had spiraled into full-blown alcoholism. He had owned his own successful business and had a large house, but over time, he lost all of that and had eventually moved into a small cabin in Mendocino County. We had gotten into an argument the last time we spoke, as I told him he needed treatment and to stop asking me for money. He never called me again after that. I hadn't really worried too much about the note, but a small, nagging voice at the back of my head told me I should go and warn Johnny, just in case. Around 7 p.m., I left the dingy, cramped hotel room and headed to my rental car. I put in my brother's address, seeing he only lived about 30 minutes away. I felt strange going to see him out of the blue like this when we hadn't talked in nearly 4 years. The scenic road took me along the coastline, past rugged rocks and deep blue ocean. With some Johnny Cash playing in the background, I let myself relax, absorbing the natural beauty of this place. Soon, the road curved back into thick, dark forest. I checked the GPS, seeing my brother lived only a few miles away. As I got closer, I felt anxious and uncertain. What if he didn't want to see me? "You have arrived," the robotic voice said as I saw a small, dilapidated cabin at the end of a dirt road. Sharp rocks crunched rhythmically under the tires. The wide boughs of evergreens fanned out behind the cabin, with many of the branches leaning on the roof and walls. The grass looked overgrown and riddled with weeds. In the small driveway, the hunk of a rusted-out car stood next to a small moped. Heaving a deep sigh, I opened the door and started heading down the cracked concrete walkway towards the cabin. I took a flashlight out of my pocket, shining it through the shadowy yard. To my surprise, I saw the front door standing wide open. All of the lights in the house looked dark. Something like an iron band gripped my heart at that moment. I felt something primal screaming within my subconscious, some ancient intuition that shrieked at me, "This is wrong." I walked into the front room wrinkling my nose. A fetid smell like old garbage and rotting food hung thick in the air. Behind these rank odors though, I noticed something more subtle and yet more revolting. I knew it well from my work with the FBI. It was the smell of death, of blood and dying sweat. "Johnny," I yelled into the blackness. "It's me, Ray. Are you here?" In response, I heard only the echoing of my voice and the rapid thudding of my heart. I pulled my service pistol from its holster, a Glock 19X, chambered in 9mm. It was a sleek, reliable gun with a sheer black exterior. With my flashlight in one hand and my pistol in the other, I crossed my arms and started moving forward, clearing the corners and doorways as I went. The creeping shadows dancing across the room made my adrenaline-soaked brain see false silhouettes more than once. White-knuckled with terror, I cleared the living room, seeing an empty bottle of vodka on the old wooden table. Countless cigarette burns scarred the table's pockmarked surface. I made my way into the kitchen, seeing a scene straight from a hoarder documentary. Dozens of garbage bags stood in a pyramid in the corner, their plastic surfaces swollen almost to bursting. The glittering of white rodent eyes shone briefly before disappearing into cracks and holes in the walls. A cockroach skittered across the stained tiled floor, disappearing into the mountain of trash. The sink held countless dishes with pieces of rotting food still clinging to their surfaces. A jungle of black and yellow molds grew over them, rising up in circular patches with wet, glistening filaments. The entire cabin consisted of only a single floor. Inhaling deeply, I moved into the last area, the bedroom. I pushed the door slowly, wincing as its joints creaked with a whining of rusted metal. It opened up onto a scene from a nightmare. I saw my brother, Johnny, laying there on the bed. His arms and legs were tied to the posts, spread out like Jesus on the cross. The killer had cut out both of his eyes. The dark sockets shrieked silently up at nothing like two empty, screaming mouths. In his arms and legs, I saw strange circular patches of melted, purplish flesh. The skin looked eaten away, revealing veins like fat worms and glistening muscle. Black, necrotic burns surrounded the ugly wounds. Johnny's mouth still lay frozen in a silent scream, the tip of a purple tongue sticking out of his blue lips. "Oh shit, Johnny," I whispered sadly, feeling sick and disgusted by the sight. The murderer had carved a symbol into his chest as well. I saw an eye sliced into the spot above his heart. Around it, 12 wavy protrusions emerged like crude tentacles. Drips of dried, darkening blood surrounded the mutilation. But what had killed him? I didn't know. I raised my flashlight, clearing the corners of the filthy room. On the nicotine-stained wall, I saw more spatters of blood. Moving closer, I realized they formed words. The killer had left me a message. "Sometimes he gets inside of you and makes you do things you don't want to do," it read. I glanced down at my cell phone, trying to call the police. Out here in the middle of nowhere, however, I had no service. I tried 911 3 times, but I couldn't get it to ring once. Cursing, I decided to run back to the car. I knew that I had cell phone service back on the scenic road near the shoreline, because I had used the internet to play Johnny Cash on the drive. I just needed to drive back in that direction until I got closer to a cell phone tower and call for help. Johnny had no neighbors nearby except trees and animals. In reality, this cabin appeared the perfect scene for a murder. No one would hear the screams of the tortured victim all the way out here. I felt instant regret for not organizing protection around my surviving family members as soon as we found the note. I knew I needed to contact Agent Stone and warn him that the killer might target his family as well. I made it outside, taking a great lungful of fresh air. It tasted immensely sweet and refreshing after the oppressive odor of death and putrefying garbage. Breathing heavily, I bent over, trying not to retch. The horrors of what I had seen hit me all at once, like a freight train crashing into my mind. I heard the cracking of twigs nearby and the rustling of leaves. Looking up, I saw a black silhouette creeping around the side of the house, only steps away from me. I instantly recognized the man from the sedan's video feed, wearing all black clothes and a black ski mask. Before I could react, he ran at me, raising a glittering blood-stained butcher's knife above his head. I stumbled back, thrown off balance by the abrupt assault. I tried to raise my pistol and aim, but before I could bring it up, the man reached me. I saw the knife coming down in slow motion, aimed at the center of my face. I twisted my body, throwing myself to the side. The knife whizzed past my ear, slicing through the air in a blur. A moment later, I heard a crunching of bone and felt a cold numbness spread through my left shoulder. I landed hard on the ground, looking over and seeing the knife embedded deeply into my flesh. Bright red streams of blood instantly spurted from the wound. The black handle still quivered, shivering in its place. I couldn't feel my left hand anymore. I dropped the flashlight on the ground with a dull thud, raising the pistol and firing in the direction of the madman. He gave a grunt of pain as a bullet connected with his stomach. He took a few steps back, nearly falling but catching himself at the last moment. I could hear his pained, rapid breathing. Reaching quickly toward his belt, I saw him pull a pistol of his own. I kept firing, my shaking, unsteady hands missing most of the shots. As he started to aim at my head, I used the last round in my magazine. I inhaled deeply, aiming and firing. The bullet caught him in the right leg, sending him spinning. He fell hard on the ground. The gun went flying from his hand. He gave a surprised shout of pain as blood soaked into his clothes, causing the wet, glistening fabric to stick tightly to his skin. I heard sirens in the distance, approaching rapidly. Slowly, I sat up, my head spinning from the blood loss and pain. Red and blue lights split the creeping shadows apart. The shrill whining of the siren cut off abruptly. The police car arriving was the last thing I remember before falling forward. A wave of weakness shot through my body as a black wave crept up and dragged me under. From what I found out later, after we had sent the note to the FBI, the supervisor in charge of the case decided to send police protection to the family members of myself and Agent Stone throughout the country. They had sent a couple state troopers to my brother's house until the earthquake killer got captured or killed by police. I couldn't imagine how surprised they must have been to arrive and find an FBI agent bleeding out next to the killer. They quickly got ambulances and paramedics there. I went into emergency surgery and would eventually regain full use of my arm after extensive physical therapy. The earthquake killer too ended up surviving, though they had removed over 5 feet of intestines and part of his liver in the process. I woke up in the hospital to see Agent Stone standing grimly over my bed, his tanned skin gleaming with sweat. His pale eyes, which never seemed to show a shred of emotion, sparkled for a moment when he saw me conscious. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said, giving me a crooked half grin. "You did it, Harper. You got the bastard. He's in the same hospital as us right now, handcuffed to the bed and guarded by police." "I should have shot him in the head," I whispered, my throat cracked and dry. "He doesn't deserve to be alive." Agent Stone nodded, shrugging his massive shoulders. "Well, we can't change the past," he responded blithely. "Turns out the guy's name is Herbert Mueller. Your profile was right on the money. White male, 28 years old, long history of institutionalization and paranoid schizophrenia. You won't believe his rationale for killing all those people." "What?" he confessed. I asked, surprised. "Already? I wasn't even there. Damn it, I wanted to be there." Agent Stone only shrugged. "Well, the evidence would have sealed his fate anyways. He left behind a piece of hair at one of the crime scenes, and we got his DNA from it. He said he needed to kill people to prevent earthquakes from happening." Agent Stone said, his face a stony mask that revealed nothing. I repressed an urge to laugh at the ridiculous statement, remembering how many people had died, and how horribly, including my own brother. "I still want to talk to him myself," I said. He nodded, patting me on my uninjured shoulder. "As soon as you get cleared by the doctors, we'll talk to him together. I think you'll be surprised at what he has to say." I spent the next couple days in the hospital recovering from my surgery before being medically cleared to leave. I felt immensely grateful to get away from the tasteless hospital food and the incessant boredom. Watching TV for days straight felt mind-numbing. Excitedly, I put on my black suit, hanging the left side over my cast. I would need months of physical therapy and treatment before my arm would fully recover. Herbert Mueller was still in the hospital, under constant watch. Agent Stone and I would go and interrogate him alone. I walked into the room with Agent Stone by my side, seeing a wiry man with dark, wavy hair laying on a hospital bed. His legs sat in a cast, and bandages covered his stomach and chest. I smiled, seeing the extent of his injuries. Agent Stone and I pulled up some chairs and sat down close by his side. He turned to regard us with eyes the color of steel. On one of his arms, I saw a tattoo that said, "Eagle Eyes, LSD." "How did you find out my brother's name and address? How did you find out who me and my partner are?" I asked. The earthquake killer gave a wide, lunatic grin, his silvery eyes sparkling with suppressed humor. He leaned close to me. I noticed a subtle, cloying odor that followed him around, almost like roses. "God told me," Herbert answered simply. I raised an eyebrow at that. "God told you to kill, or he gave you the information?" I said. "Both," he answered. "Sometimes God reaches down and uses us. Sometimes he gets inside of us and makes us do things we don't want to do." "That doesn't seem like a very loving God," I responded. Herbert shrugged. "How did you first contact him?" His eyes went slack, his mouth opened. Herbert looked as if he were staring a million miles away. Abruptly, he came back, focusing on me again. Well, people like you can't really understand, any more than a blind man could understand the beauty of colors and light. I used to be just a normal guy, working and going to school, but one day, after taking a high dose of acid, I dissolved my individual soul into the universal soul. It was as if I held up a candle's flame to the sun and saw that these were the same, that the light of the smallest and the light of the greatest are both just eternal light. In the beginning, something endless and unmoving stood like a pillar of mind, outside of time and space, yet within everything and everyone. When I saw my soul, this smallest flame of blinding light, I knew I also saw the one, the eternal. And then a voice came to me, a voice like rushing water and static. It screamed into my mind, over and over. At that moment, I knew what Moses must have felt like and why he aged so rapidly when he saw God. And do you know what that shrieking voice said? I just shook my head. He leaned close, his gray eyes cold and dead. It wanted sacrifices. God said to me, pick up the victims and throw them over the boat. Kill some so that many may be saved. God showed me what kinds of horrible things would happen if I did not follow his orders. I saw massive earthquakes ripping apart the land and tearing down the mountains, killing hundreds of thousands of people in minutes. I saw cities collapsing, trapping millions under the rubble. In that vision, I had no self, no sense of me, but I saw everything and knew it to be the absolute truth. I did what I had to out of love and compassion. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but what kind of man would I be if I let the many die for a few? But now that I'm here, being kept as a prisoner, the sacrifices are not being performed. God will send down an earthquake at any moment to kill us for our countless transgressions. The sins of the earth are too great for him to turn away. Agent Stone and I stared hard at this man, wondering if he was truly as insane as he claimed. How did you kill my brother? I asked, a sense of revulsion rising in my chest. What were those marks on his body, those strange, black and purple patches eaten into his skin? Herbert Mueller grinned at this, showing off filmy, yellowed teeth. Well, the thing is, God wants a lot of suffering and pain in exchange for saving the innocent. Sometimes, we have to be like Jesus. Your brother told me telepathically to kill him. All of the victims did. Humans have been communicating telepathically for thousands of years. After I saw God, I could tap into that power, and all of the victims pleaded with me to kill them. They said, "We're like Jonah from the Bible. Throw us over the side of the ship so that others may be saved." In a way, I'm like Jesus. I gave up my life as a sacrifice to God, and now I only serve that soul which is also my soul. I see everything clearly now, things I never saw before. This reality is an illusion, and there's no such thing as death. We're all just eternal sparks of the One. So your brother, well, I injected acid and bleach into his skin. I just wanted to see what would happen, but he did not react well at all. He kept thrashing and screaming, and after I cut out his eyes, he stopped moving. I think the hydrochloric acid got into his bloodstream and killed him somehow, but who knows? I'm not a doctor, I'm just God. At that moment, a team of agents wearing dark sunglasses walked into the room. I saw a dozen of them, and for a brief moment, I thought they were all FBI. I wondered what would have caused the FBI to send so many people for a case we had already solved. "We're taking this case over," one of the men said, the tallest of them standing at the front. I guessed he was the leader of the group. Agent Stone and I looked at each other, confused. The man pulled out a silver badge. I read it, frowning. "The Department for the Cleansing of Anomalies," I asked. "What is this, a joke? This is an FBI case, and we've already got the suspect in custody with plenty of evidence." "We're taking this suspect with us right now," he said. Two nurses came, hurrying around the bed of Herbert Mueller. They started disconnecting his medical equipment with practiced precision. He simply grinned up at us with a strange, sly expression that I couldn't read. I looked over at Agent Stone, about to say something, when I felt the first tremblings of an earthquake start shaking the walls and floor.